Hey guys, Brian here, Starlite Pulp. Hope everybody's well out there. This is Starlite Pulpcast. I'm going to say number, I think 19. And today we've got Mr. Jim Ruland on, and he is, yeah, that guy right there. And he's a writer. He's got a brand new fiction book out. He also just put Corporate Rock Sucks out last year, so busy guy. And Corporate Rock Sucks is nonfiction. Make It Stop is fiction. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about Jim's work. So first off, Jim, how you doing out there, man?
I'm doing very good on this hot and sticky summer day.
Absolutely. All right, good. So first off, so you started out in fiction, right? And then for a very long time, you're working on a lot of nonfiction. You're working on a lot of the punk rock zines and did books with both Keith Morris and then also Bad Religion. And now we've got a novel, like I said, Make It Stop, which has just come out. Why the trip back into fiction?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I had like a real snappy answer for like, well, I decided to like dust off my fiction chops and bust out a novel. But the truth is I actually was working on that novel, working uh that whole time. So like right around the time when my first novel came out in 2014, I think I was already starting work on the next one or had the ideas for it. And it just took me that long to get something that I, thought was good. I mean, I tried to get it out there and it took as long as it did.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, you did. I saw that you mentioned a couple times in here, in particular in the afterword, that it did take you a quite a bit of time. If I'm not mistaken, you mentioned kind of writing a futuristic mental health care book that turns into kind of a present day because of how long it took to write it. So, the
Yeah, that's
yeah, go ahead.
you're gonna write like a, Black Mirror near future kind of thing. My advice to you is don't take a fucking long time to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
World has a way of catching up with us.
absolutely. Well, and that's funny because I bring this up with a lot of writers that are on, and that's actually funny enough. One of the reasons why a lot of the stuff that I write, I tend to write in the late 40s and 50s because I never need to worry about that. It all happened. Everything I need to research is there, as opposed to what new cell phone to how they took pictures and what apps were on that phone and all that kind of stuff that you don't need to worry about. So yeah, absolutely understand. So one of the reviews on this called it, which I love. I think it's a great wordplay, but it called it a scathing indictment of the rehab industrial complex. And obviously, the protagonist in this is Melanie, and she struggles with sobriety. So how did the idea for Melanie come about, and kind of the just for the genesis for the kind of not only indictment but also analysis of the rehab complex? How did that come into play?
Well, sure. What you need to know, I guess, if you haven't read the book, is that it's set in a world where if you don't pay your hospital bills, you don't get to leave. And so Make It Stop is the name of a vigilante group that busts people out of these prison hospitals. And they focus on people who are dealing with drug and alcohol addiction and who are stuck in rehab wards and psych units and things like that, mainly because they're all recovering alcoholics and addicts. That's who they are. So they're kind of taking that recovery angle of broken people, helping broken people a step further by like going into like vigilante mode. So that's the setup. And so the reason why I narrowed it down like that is for a couple of reasons. Is one, it's because of my own struggles, with recovery and alcohol abuse. I've been sober, I think she's 14 years now, something like that. Yeah, 14 years. And the other thing is that it kind of opened my eyes to the way the healthcare system makes it really hard for people like alcoholics, like addicts, like people with brain health issues, like people who are having psychological crises going on and disrupting their lives, how indifferent the healthcare system can be to those people and how vulnerable those people can be, especially if you don't have all your paperwork, you don't have your shit together, you don't have you maybe you're in between jobs or haven't had a job, or you can't work right now because you got your license taken away, so you can't drive anywhere. Any one of those little things happen and it becomes this cascading effect
Sure.
where you're really powerless. And then, the rehab industrial complex has got you where you have fewer and fewer options except to go into these rehab inpatient rehab centers, to go into group homes, go into sober living facilities, because you literally can't afford anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. And you know what? Honestly, Jim, I think that you can say that for a lot of things in our society right now. It's just that there so many people are on this kind of this cliff almost where they're living month to month and something happens, whatever it is, a huge car issue, huge health issue, whatever it might be, and within 6 months you can find yourself homeless or in some kind of institution, just based on misfortune. And
Yeah, I mean, if you were to do an experiment right now, and go online and let's say you need to find a room, not a house, not an apartment, but a room where you can live tomorrow or next week or something like that. I guarantee you the cheapest ones that you're going to find are going to be in sober living facilities. And they're just going to pop up on the internet. And then what do you think happens when you get there? Then you have to take drug tests, and then you have to follow all these rules to be in this environment. It's really strange and sad and upsetting the way that we treat the most vulnerable members of society.
oh, absolutely, no argument there. So you started this a long time ago, right? Make it stop.
Yeah.
So what was the inspiration for it?
Well, I was reading the LA Times, and there was a article about a maternity hospital in Nigeria where they were not letting. I think they were holding the mothers until, like, in the hospital. Like, you give birth to a baby, the baby can go, but the mom has to stay until the bills are paid. And because this is the 21st century, we know how important that bonding time is between the mother and the newborn. So they're basically holding young mothers hostage and preventing them from being with their children because of money. So I was immediately thinking about, like, the ways that might play out in the United States, in California. And because I was fairly new or newish to recovery at that time, and because part of my alcoholic brain thinks the world revolves around me, I thought, well, how would this play out, in the world of recovery?
Right.
And so that was my solution: is hot vigilante action.
Absolutely. Sounds good to me. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, there's going to be a meeting on Saturday if anyone wants to sign up for Make a Stop for vigilante movement.
That's right. So when you were doing, I mean, it's a fiction book, so you can make up what you need to make up, which is always a nice part about fiction. But when did you do a lot of research for this, or was it something you had personal experience in, or was it a mixture, or how'd you go about that?
It was a mixture. I mean, I had a first draft pretty early on, but like I said, it took me a long time to get to a point where I was really happy with it. It's not like there's a lot of research you can do on, like, vigilante groups, operating underground today. But in a way, it's also like, you know, I got a lot of inspiration from television, and
Okay.
where I was really enamored with all these shows where they're like, some of them are police shows, but they're like more like super cop shows. They're not really, some of them are even superhero shows, but it's this deal where all the good guys assemble in this like really cool headquarters, and the
Yeah.
computer spits out data, and they all look at these screens, and they look at it, and they give each other instructions, and then they're like finishing each other's sentences, and then they all go rush off and, you know, save whatever that person is or stop the evildoer. And I think that's so farcical and kind of comical. And I thought, well, what would that look like, except if it's like a bunch of drunks trying to pull this off? And so that's where I have this like kind of pseudo hierarchy of make it stop, that informs the novel. And it's like, in many ways, it's a lot like recovery in that, like an AA meeting or recovery meeting, it works because everybody kind of agrees to the rules,
Right.
and follows the rules. And it's a organization if everyone believes it's an organization, which is really just a metaphor for society, right? If enough people say, oh, fuck this, we're just gonna, do what we want and bring our guns and do whatever, then you see society starts to break down. So that's kind of what I was playing.
Excellent. Yeah, good. Okay. Absolutely. All right, good. So yeah, I mean, by the way, how did you this is on Rare Bird, yeah? And I always talk to I always talk to writers because getting novels published is such an interesting process for a lot of people, and such a frustrating process for a lot of people. How did you go about, because for example, Corporate Rock Sucks is on Hachette, right? And Make It Stop's on Rare Bird. So how did that happen in terms of the two different publishing houses and agents, and how'd that work?
Well, I guess the simple answer is that my agent, sorry, not my, I do have an agent, but like my agent wasn't able to ever sell any of my fiction. So all my fiction has been published by indie presses.
Right.
If you look up my first novel, Forest of Fortune, it'll say Simon and Schuster, but it was an indie press that got sold, that got bought out, which is now part of Simon and Schuster, which I guess is going to be sold at some point. So who knows? Who knows what imprint or how the book will be labeled in the future. But the point is that being able to sell the nonfiction projects or get hired to work on nonfiction projects, through my agent, with major publishers. But I have not, had that experience with fiction. And I've known Tyson Cornell, the publisher of Rare Bird, for quite some time. I've had a bunch of friends who have been on at that house. And I think I occasionally review books for the LA Times. I may even have reviewed a book, or when I've hosted readings, I've had readers who are Rare Bird authors. So it's just something where you getting to know people from being involved in the literary community. It wasn't anything more than that.
Okay. Yeah. No, I understand. I mean, it's so funny because the way that things break for people, for anybody, for any artist really, for actors as well as singers and everybody else. But for me, I mean, my first novel, I had 3 books of poetry out, but my first novel was put out because somebody called me and said, "Hey, we're starting to press you a novel, right?" And I was, yeah,
Yeah.
it was somebody I'd known for 15 years or something, and so it was like, yeah, it just came together. So
Yeah, same thing. My first collection of stories came out through Razor K. Gorski, through the zine that I've been writing for since 2001, Punk Rock Zine.
Yeah, so it's just funny because at Starlite we have people contact us all the time, like, what's the best way to try to get a novel published, stuff like that. And it's like, I sit there and go, well,
when you figure it out, let me know.
Exactly. I'm like, so yeah, it's so I always try to ask writers because I'm trying to garner as much knowledge as I can in here. Okay, so Corporate Rock Sucks came out in 2022, so this was only last year. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, so I mean,
paperback came out this spring.
Yeah, and so it's on the rise and fall of SST Records. And so for those people that have no idea what SST Records is, which is going to be a lot of people to see this, SST was at one point had bands like well, first off, it was started by one of the founders of Black Flag, right? And then Minutemen, Husker Du, Bad Brains, Sonic Youth, Dinosaur Jr., Screaming Trees, Early Soundgarden. These are all bands that were on SST. Many of which of those are maybe not household names, but certainly names to people that know, some of the music scene. And so,
or old like us, you can go ahead and say it.
Or old, yeah, just old people. So how did the research for Corporate Rock Sucks go, and how did you get kind of into that project?
Sure. Well, it really all begins with Keith Morris. Keith, I'd worked with him on his book, and I'd sat in his apartment many times and listened to him tell stories about the early days of Black Flag and SST Records, which was formed in Hermosa Beach. And Keith grew up there, as did so many other people in that circle. And so I heard all of these stories. So when I was working on the project, it was Keith who kind of pointed me, like talk to this person, talk to that person, and really gave me his blessing, because Keith is not a big fan of Greg Ginn. Not to spoiler alert, but things have not worked out so well for SST. Right. It's still a functional label, but barely, and it has a very many of its artists have a very poor don't think well of the label because of allegations that they've not been compensated fairly, or want to get the rights to the music back and haven't been able to do that. So there's a lot of animosity there, but going back to the beginning of the project, it had to do with that. And also I think because I lived in LA for about 10 years, and most of that was down in the South Bay. I lived in Manhattan Beach for a little bit, and I lived in Playa del Rey, which is barely South Bay, but technically is. So in that area, to know that it's just different. It's just different down there. All that south of the airport, west of Sepulveda, it's just kind of like a different version of LA that most people are used to. And so I was really frustrated by a lot of things that I read about Black Flag and the lore of SST coming from writers in England and New York and even San Francisco. And they didn't really seem to understand that Hermosa Beach was different from Huntington Beach. They were not the same thing. They were very, very different scenes, different places, different vibes, So I felt like my own familiarity, even though I don't claim to be from the South Bay, but just having lived there and understood it and soaking up the lore of Black Flag and SST in a place like that, I thought that appreciation gave me just a little bit more insight into what made SST unique.
Okay. And how did you so talk to me about that progression there, right? Because I believe you mentioned you're from Virginia, is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So Virginia to the Navy,
yep,
to then Los Angeles. How did that happen?
Well, after I joined the Navy, I grew up in Northern Virginia. My father was in the Navy, so I moved all over the East Coast.
Got it. Yep.
And he was a naval officer, and we had those very typical father-son struggles. And me being 17 and not very bright, I thought the best way to get out from under his thumb was to enlist in the Navy, which looking back was a fairly short-sighted thing to do. Not the brightest move on my part, but enlist I did, and I got sent to San Diego, which was a revelation to be in California and experience that.
Sure.
And then I went all over the world, went on a Westpac, a 6-month tour of the Western Pacific, and that was pretty life-changing. But when I got out of the Navy, I had to go back to Virginia, that was my home of record, and that's where I could use my VA benefits. So once I went back to school, I had to go back to Virginia, and it was after that is what I knew I wanted to get out of the away from the East Coast, away from like the real conformist, you know, kind of thinking that I grew up in and around the DC suburbs, and
Sure.
get out to California. And it was there is when I started to write for punk rock zines,
Right.
and that was my entry into that world.
Okay. And so how does that happen though? So you go from the Navy, right? And then you move to Southern California, LA, and you're writing for punk rock zines right away. Like how did you get into that scene? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, it's I won't go into all the I had a friend,
Mhm.
and a friend was started to work for Razor Cake, and I mean, sorry, for Flipside.
Mhm.
And so right away he started sending me CDs to review. And then so I started
Got
to
it.
review those CDs, and that led to being able to do interviews.
Mhm.
We would go on interviews together, and then I was doing interviews on my own. And then when I became trustworthy enough somehow, because I don't think I was trustworthy at all, I turned everything in late. Um, I got a column, and then so I started to have those more deadlines and more experience working with editors, writing for an audience. And so when Flipside folded, and my friends Todd Taylor and Sean Carswell started up Razor Cake Fanzine, um, I went along with them as a contributor, but I also kind of told myself, like, okay, Jim, it's time to get serious, and try to be a little bit of a better punk rock, a more reliable punk rock writer, and try to get better at this.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned that one of the things that was frustrating to you was a lot of what you consider kind of misconceptions, right, about SST, from various other places. And so when you started doing the research, and you start looking into these bands, and you start looking into the way SST was run, or whatever dysfunction was there, um, what were some things that you were doing when you were doing the research that kind of surprised you?
Well, I mean, that's the thing when you started a project, like, and know how it ends, right? Going in, I knew that there was a lot of bad blood between the artists and Greg Ginn. And
Sure.
when every artist I approached, I had to say, I am not associated with SST at all. This book
Right,
is
right,
completely independent, and basically explain that, like, yes, I have nothing to do with SST, and this book is under contract. It's going to happen. It's not just some
right.
passion project, that you're not wasting your time talking to me, because a lot of people, that was a big obstacle for people, because they've all been in it. A lot of these people have been interviewed many times and were kind of tired of it. And they were very wary of people, trying to exploit them,
Sure.
or for those kinds of reasons. So that was something. And so going into it, knowing all that, I was really surprised by just how inspired I felt about those early days of SST, and how interesting it was, and how motivated everybody was, and how everybody in the circle reflected that energy. People who, guys like Mugger, who started out. It's easy to say he started out as a roadie, but really he started out as someone who would sleep on the floor at SST, and then, Greg basically put him to work and said, "Hey, this guy is
Right.
reliable. This guy's smart." And fast forward, I don't know how many years, and he's one of the owners of the company. So stories like that I thought were just really fascinating, and really the whole cult like uh, energy that surrounded SST, um, because it was anything but corporate. It was these people doing this thing. They were going on missions. They were doing something that most people, thought they were crazy for trying to do. And it's also, you had to go back and forget that, like, remember that this was a time when, for punk rockers, there's no path to a career or a payday or anything like that.
Right.
Um, so when even today, when musicians, and not even just punk rockers, but indie musicians, go back and read about the early days of Black Flag, they read Henry Rollins Get in the Van, and it's tremendously inspiring. You read these interviews with these people and the experiences they had and the desire to do something new and do it unconditionally on their own terms. It's just incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very cool. That's very cool. Okay, so one of the quotes on Corporate Rock Sucks from the New Republic, which I really liked, and I'm going to read this without my glasses, so wish me luck. But it says Corporate Rock Sucks explains how SST unraveled, but it's also a case study in how principled countercultural movements under the iron grip of capitalist realism have again and again made themselves toothless adjuncts to the mainstream. At a moment when it's hard to imagine anything in American culture posing a threat to the established social order, Rouland's book helps explain why we lack a meaningful counterculture today. So first, right. So there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack there. But the concept is oftentimes, and it certainly happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you as well. Sometimes people see things in our work that isn't really there. Like, you put something out and they go, oh, this is a great countercultural movement against, and you're like, really? You saw that? Okay. But in this particular case, New Republic, they're making a statement here that we lack any kind of meaningful counterculture today. What are your thoughts on that? How do you think the book itself plays into that? But then also, what are your thoughts on that concept?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about that. Like, it's always a good reminder to be reviewed that, like, once you write something, whether it's a novel or it's a passion project like this SST book was, or anything, that once it goes out there, it really doesn't belong to you anymore. You don't get to say, yeah, but I meant this, and yeah, also don't forget about that. It's just out there, and you can't do anything about it. And I really like I generally don't read the reviews. I just skim them so I know if I can share them or not. Because
Sure.
thing about bad reviews is that, like, if I forget, we're about the same age. I don't know if it's because of Gen X or because of having COVID twice, but like I forget things pretty easily now, and that includes bad reviews. And so if I read reviews and they're bad, I'm just gonna get upset at them over and over again, So I just like skim. Is that all right? Okay, that's a good one. Everyone else,
there you go.
I don't need to. But what I think was really interesting about that is that we're about the same age. I mean, when we were in high school and a little bit after that, like, say, like when Slacker came out,
Mhm.
the idea of being a sellout was like, if you want to hurt somebody, you want to hurt an artist, an independent artist, is call them a sellout. It was like
Sure.
practically fighting words.
Oh yeah.
People would twist themselves in knots trying to be like, yeah, well, but like what it all meant. And like when Henry Rollins, showed up in a Gap ad, people lost their fucking minds, and now people were like, oh, really? Henry Rollins was a Gap model? That's kind of cool. So our views of what it means to be a sellout is completely changed. And I think you can really now only be a sellout if you're a total hypocrite. But our political system demonstrates that even that isn't valued anymore, since the GOP is just one shining glob of hypocrisy and nobody cares. So, because I don't know if, like, I think that writer was responding to this idea that it's impossible to be a sellout anymore, and there's any kind of success is tied, mainstream success or monetary success is tied to those ideas, that it's eradicated the idea of a like an underground cultural underground, but only in the sense that it used to be where you could work in a bookstore and have a car in a shitty apartment and be okay. You were never
live.
gonna like get ahead, but you could live. You
Yeah.
weren't you wasn't like desperate. I mean, yeah, there were some close months where you're like, how am I going to pay rent? But for the most part, you had your job, you did your work, maybe you had some roommates you didn't like, but that was, the price of being able to, like, you know, have a slacker job and, sit in a coffee shop all morning and think your thoughts and read your books and imagine yourself as an artist. You
Yeah.
can't really do that anymore. You need all these, you need several jobs and several side hustles, and
Yeah.
you can never keep up with your college debt. You can't keep up with any kind of rent increase. You can't keep up with a mortgage. It's just an awful situation now. So
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that there aren't people out there making really cool music um, in the underground, because
Of course there
they're
are.
doing it.
Yeah.
More people than we could possibly name in 100 podcasts are doing it today, right now.
Yeah.
You just got to seek it out. They're out there. We talked about this a little bit beforehand about the whole notion of scenes and whether it's possible for there to be scenes anymore in this, late stage capitalism. But it is. There are people who refute all those ideas of success and are making cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, but Jim, I would argue that that is honestly, man. I mean, artists, regardless of what it is, artist, musician, painter, writer, whatever. Artists are, first off, they're a little bit off for the most part. Secondly, they're going to make their art, and if it gets in the way of something, so be it. If they have to do it as a side hustle, so be it. If they get paid to do it, so be it. But at the end of the day, you're going to find a way to do it. Like if you have to play the guitar, you're going to find a way to play the guitar. You're going to find a band, you're going to find a stage to get up on, and you're going to do it. Just like you and I are going to sit in front of that fucking computer, whether it's already been paid for or not, in terms of the story we're going to write, and we're going to do it. I mean, it is what it is, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the whole concept of there aren't scenes anymore or anything like that. Of course there are. It's just it's morphed in terms of what it is because of the way shows are now and the way the internet is and all that kind of stuff. But they're still there. But one of the things you mentioned that I really liked there was that I think for a lot, you're absolutely right, by the way. In the early, mid, even late 80s, selling out was, I mean, that was a major term that got thrown around. And I mean, I remember even, even early 90s, because the whole Gilman Street crowd in the Bay Area was so pissed off at Green Day when
Oh,
when Dookie dropped and they were selling a ton of records. I mean, and it was interesting to watch. I wasn't necessarily a part of it. I was kind of watching it from the outskirts, because I was up there and had been to shows there, and it was kind of like, okay. But now, view that in a lens now, and I don't even think most artists would. I don't even know that they grasp the concept of selling it. Like the whole idea for a lot of people who want to quote unquote make it, right, is to sell out, because that means getting paid. So does that make sense? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I think that, like, for example, I'm no champion of like DIY aesthetics or anything like that. Yeah, my novels or my fiction's out on indie presses, but the nonfiction work is not.
mm,
But let's say I announce tomorrow that Nike is going to sponsor my next novel, whatever the fuck that means. Let's just
right.
say it happens.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to get people who are going to say, "Congratulations, dude! Like, wow, you must be making some bank," or "Wow, you can pay off some bills," or blah blah blah. You can now fuck off and do whatever you want. I mean, whatever it
Yeah.
is, it's not going to be sell out. People aren't going to call me out on it, or at least not publicly. But you know what I'm saying? I think the mindset has shifted in the sense that, like, if there's a way to profit from corporations or even exploit the exploiters, then, like, good for you. That seems to be the mindset. Get your bag, right? And I think that was the mindset at SST, to bring it back to that conversation,
Yeah.
is that the way that they were getting successful is by emulating what corporations did well, or filling in the gaps that they weren't seeing because they were coming up from the mainstream and weren't recognizing how popular this music was. But they were still doing things like, hey, let's have a guy and all he does is try to get our music on the radio. Let's have a guy who just sells ads. Let's just have people work in the mailroom and do. I mean, you had that division of labor, and it wasn't like a cult of believers where everybody does everything anymore. You had people with roles, and yeah, maybe the marketing guy is going to be dropping acid when he writes his capsule reviews. It's still SST, it's still the 80s, right?
Yeah.
But you start to see that, kind of be, imitating a corporate structure, and it gets to a point where it starts working and you start making money, and then you start having problems. You
Yeah.
start having big money problems because now people want to be compensated. It's not a cult. People want to be compensated fairly.
Yeah.
They need health insurance, right? They need a way to get to and from work. They need, you got to do all these things responsibly and ethically. You got to pay your artists. You got to pay people on time. You got to figure out how all that works. You got to make the pipeline pay just so you can continue to operate your business.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
be able to do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I love that. Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, so moving on, because we only have so much time here. I would love to keep talking to you about that, but moving on. You not only wrote a book with Bad Religion, but you also followed them on tour. And for most people, certainly for most casual fans of any kind of music, that's not something that we do. You know what I mean? I'm not going to go to Wisconsin and then to New York and then to Rome to go follow a band. And you've done some of that. So what were some observations that you have, or some things that you learned? How's that?
Sure. Well,
about
they're like it was really life changing in a lot of ways, and I'll try to keep this as short as possible. But there's some really fascinating stories and all that for me, if you allow me to use the word fascinating and talking about my own life. But I was working at an ad agency. I was working from home. It was like 2018. Bad Religion was going on tour in Europe. I had yet to really spend a lot of time with them on tour because it was getting ready to be the 30-year anniversary of Suffer. And so they were going to go on tour and play Suffer in its entirety. And I was really excited because that's my favorite Bad Religion record.
Excellent.
And so I was like, I'm going to take some time off and I'm going to go, I found like, what's the string of their tour where I can see them the most and travel a little bit and see a little bit of the world in 2 weeks and then come back to my corporate job. And so I figured it all out and I put in my request, and it was about, a few weeks before I was supposed to go. And my job was like, actually, Jim, you go ahead and have a good time because we're going to lay you off. And I was like, oh shit. I knew that was a possibility, that the writing had been on the wall for a couple of years because the company got bought out by another company, same old story. And so it wasn't really like, no, it sucks to get laid off. I knew it was coming, but no one likes to leave their job when it's not their own terms. It's much more satisfying to be like, fuck all you all and leave, right? Than to be like, it'd be good if you could be done now. And we're shutting down your email and all that. So I left and I went to Germany, and it was, only went to a handful of shows because of like the travel schedule is very weird. But I went to some shows in Germany and some shows in Italy and some shows, I think, in Switzerland, if that's right. I don't remember, but and it was somewhere in the middle of all that where I realized like, oh, like I don't have a job to go back to. This is it. This is my job. And so that kind of that was a really turned everything around for me, or I realized where like this doing these punk rock books was, I kind of treated it like the way I do Razor Kick. It's just kind of like a side gig, right? Something I do for me. And then something else pays the bills. Well, now this was it. So I had to make it work. And what I learned while I was on tour is that the band travels, in the bus and in the tour bus with the equipment, but Greg Graffin gets to the show on his own. He travels by himself to
I
protect
heard
his
that. Yeah.
because if he's on the bus, he's going to be talking to everybody, and by the time the show goes, he won't have a voice, right? So,
Ah,
so he just kind of does the lone wolf thing, and he listens to podcasts or books or whatever, thinks his Greg Graffin thoughts while he's on the road. And so what would happen is that I'd be on the bus, and I was only on the bus for a couple of stops, but we'd roll into a town and like some club like in Italy or something, and Jay Bentley would get off the bus, Brian Baker would get off the bus, and then I would get off the bus, and people would think that I was Greg Graffin. Now, this wouldn't happen in the United States where, people know that Greg Graffin doesn't have tattoos. But I think maybe in Italy, they just know that Greg Graffin is a distinguished looking older gentleman, right? And so
and
and
you
this
fit
is
the
before
bill.
I had my beard too. So I kind of people thought I was Greg Graffin, and I'd be like, oh no, I'm not Greg. And I'd have to explain this over and over again to people in the club, and sometimes even like other bands on the bill, like Italian acts who were the warm up, or other people in the festival. It was just like a weird situation that I was constantly having to say, I'm not Greg Graffin. I'm not even a roadie. I'm just here to like take notes, basically. I'm like as far down on the pecking order as you can get. um and so I was really kind of mortified that people might make that mistake and then feel embarrassed about it later. But the other guys in the band, especially Jay Bentley, thought this was hysterical, and they would have me
Right.
in a restaurant or something. They'd have me get up and take pictures with the band and be Greg Graff. I mean, it was kind of silly, kind of fun.
Right.
And so someday Greg's gonna like send me an email, be like, "Stop impersonating me.
That's right.
Cease and desist, Rouland."
That's right. Very cool. So
But if you need an impersonator, I can,
there you go. Yeah.
I'd shave for it. I'd sell out.
Very cool. How was by the way, just as a quick side note, how was writing the book with Bad Religion? How did that come about? The collaborative kind of effort.
Incredible. Um, they're all, I know this is like their reputation, but they're all incredibly smart people.
Mhm.
Um, I was really touched by their generosity and their openness. And there were no notes. They're no like, okay, this is Jim, but you can do this, but you can't be here, you can't stand here, you can't ask this, you can't eat this food. There was none of that. Um, it was kind of like, hey, when you're here, you're with us, and do whatever you want. So like I would just have a sense like, oh wow, someone seems upset. I'm gonna like go in another spot, or oh, this is a band meeting. I don't need to be here for this.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
not for me. I'm gonna leave. So that kind of thing. But just the stories that they shared, and it's just a really unique history for a band because they've been together for so long, and the core has changed, but yet the lineup has changed so many times. There's all this like juicy conflict in the middle of it, right? Like right during the mainstream punk explosion where
Sure.
Brett Gurewitz left the band and Brian Baker joined the band. It's like it was great because as fiction writers, what do we love is conflict.
Hmm.
There's plenty of conflict in punk rock, even when
Oh yeah.
the story has a happy ending.
Even when it's going well. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So taking it back here, just strictly to the writing for a second, because I haven't asked you about this. What
Sure.
You write nonfiction, you write fiction. Influences for you as a writer, whether it was something you read growing up or something that is still around now. But what kind of voice or style kind of impacts you when you think about things?
You know what? I think Barry Gifford. And I say I can funnel it down to just one name for a couple of reasons, because I love Barry Gifford's work and his writing, like his very modular style of prose. Like all of his books, are very short chapters. and moved, a lot of action, a lot of dialogue. You can see if you read Make It Stop that, like, the apple has not fallen that far from the tree. Not that we're related, that doesn't really work, but like you can see the influence is what I'm saying.
Right.
But also, I mean, Barry Gifford was, what's Black Lizard? It's Barry Gifford's, project, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Back when it was Berkeley Arts, and he and another collaborator, whose gentleman whose name I'm forgetting, were running that and reissuing all those novels.
Yep.
And those then getting back into circulation and then getting picked up and distributed. And so that, if you were in the late 80s, early 90s, you were reading these Black Lizard books and
Oh, I
getting
was.
exposed to Jim Thompson and getting
Mhm. Oh,
exposed,
yeah.
to David Goodis and all these, forgotten pulp writers. And not just us, but all the people who were in Hollywood making movies were snapping these books up too and
Yep.
adapting them. And it really, I think that crime boom of the 90s is reflected in those Black Lizard reprints. And I'm just only mentioning some of the big names, but some of like the novels that have stayed with me are ones from, people who are one and done, or only one or two of their books were
Yeah.
made it up to the imprint.
Sure.
And that opened up, once I exhausted the Black Lizard catalog. Well, then I started looking for like those originals. And in the 90s, you could go into any bookstore, like a good
Oh my
used
gosh,
bookstore,
tell me about
and
it.
you could find them, and they would be a
Yeah.
buck or $2 or
Yeah.
something. Now they're all like in plastic, and it's like
Oh,
$20 up.
I
But
know. I know.
you could
Kills me.
just like, and that's how I discovered Richard Stark, and I read all of those novels, and I would just take chances based on these connections, kind of like the way you do with a label and the punk rock bands you love.
Yeah.
See, oh, this writer was, used to be on this old press. I'm going to try this, and um, so it all comes back to Barry Gifford for me for a lot of that, because I graduated from college with like a love and a real hunger for literature, and I didn't have a fucking clue how to write it
Mhm.
at all. I mean, because I mean, I love James Joyce, I love Thomas Pynchon, I loved,
Sure.
all these, huge figures. But like, it wasn't until I started reading like a Jim Thompson novel and be like, oh, it's story, it's setting, it's
Uh-huh.
dialogue, and it's style for
Uh-huh.
days.
For
This is
days.
how you tell a story. This is
Yeah.
how to do it. This is
It
one way to do it,
it seems so simple until you try to do it, and then it's not that simple.
Yeah, but you can see with Thompson, like once you start reading his novels, they're all different,
Oh yeah.
because like,
Yeah, yeah.
here's his Faulkner, his stab at a Faulkner, where he's gonna mess around with things. Here's his As I Lay Dying.
Mhm.
Here's his Hemingway. I mean, was constantly imitating and aping the styles of others, and doing it and having a lot of fun. You could tell too. So I found that was kind of like, even though I did end up going to grad school, that was where I really learned the mechanics of storytelling, was in those old pulp novels.
Sure. Sure. No, I love that. Yeah, I mean, man, that those Black Lizard reprints were just, I mean, first off, the covers were fantastic, but even James M. Cain that they brought out, and Chester Himes, and just a whole bunch of authors that had just fallen by the wayside over the years. And it's so funny because I was big into those too, for sure. Black Lizard and the anthologies they used to put out too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the short story. I mean, just fantastic stuff. And it's so funny because when we started Starlite, I kind of had this concept of kind of a Black Lizard idea, but at the same time, kind of having it almost like a punk rock or an indie label, which is why we integrated the logo and that kind of stuff, just because we thought, what, let's just try to do this whole DIY thing just on our own, and I it just cracks me up that here we are talking about SST and Black Lizard, and that's I mean, very much kind of what we're all about. So
Yeah, we were. I mean, we were obviously breathing the same oxygen, right?
yeah, pretty much, yeah. So that's awesome.
So
That's
how is
awesome.
it that if we're roughly the same age, I think I'm 3 years older, that I look like a distinguished elderly gentleman, and you look very young. Secret.
No, no, I don't. I don't look young. I haven't graduated to the gray beard yet, but I look forward to it. Um, it's like you said, it's very distinguished looking. I dig it.
Well,
But
I think I would get rid of it, but my wife likes it, so I'm kind of stuck with it. I'm in the happy wife, happy life club. So
absolutely, unfortunately, I'm the opposite because my wife probably wishes I would shave it, but I can't. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've had it for so long now. I can't imagine. In fact, I've done it a couple times where I shave it and I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, whoa, who
who
is
is that weirdo?
that? So yeah, I'd have a hard time with that. um, okay, so we'll finish it up here. Jim, been a pleasure having you on. I know you got to get to a Dodgers Padres game. Go Dodgers. And first off, this is Jim's most recent book, Make It Stop, novel. Pick it up wherever you can. I always want to say pick it up at a bookstore. Nobody goes to bookstores. Pick it up at your nearest virtual shelf. And then of course we have Corporate Rock Sucks. This came out last year as well. Jim, hang out with me for just a second after this, but thank you so much, everybody, for coming on today. This was Jim Ruland. Been a pleasure, and thanks, Jim.
Hey, you're very welcome. Thank you.
In this topsy-turvy